good as it looks.
Y'all, while we waiting on a few more to get back from feeding the face over across the road, I want to tell everybody I'm sorry we had to back it off a little bit, but thank you for being patient. And we kind of ran long on the floor. We've been recognizing everybody and their brother for the last couple of weeks. So anyway, that kind of put us off, and then there was a couple of arguments on some bills on the floor that folks got a little long-winded on, which is okay. That's what they're supposed to do. But I appreciate you being patient. While we waiting, Dominic, would you say a prayer for us, please, sir? Which one's your button? Mash your button so I can tell. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's pray. Heavenly Father God, we love you. Thank you for this day. Thank you for the precious gift of life, all that you provide us. Thank you that you allow us to help you do all the things in this state and nation that you require and that the people want us to do on their behalf. Just help us to always be wise in our decisions and use discernment and compassion in all that we do. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Thank you, Dominic. You know, you watch the weather, especially up in this part of the country, and you see the weathermen fussing about the rain and all. Well, where I come from, and where most folks on this committee come from, we kind of like it. It sometimes, good Lord, could spread it out in July and August a little bit, but Lord, yeah. He knows what he's doing, and we don't argue with him. He didn't ask any of our opinion, and it's a good thing we ain't in charge. So,
I'm ready to start whenever you are.
okay. Well, we got one bill today, and let me tell you this too. We hadn't had an ag meeting yet because we hadn't had any legislation, and I don't care nothing about meeting just to look at this crowd sitting around this table. But we have all of a sudden got stuff piled up on us now in the last few days. So we will start having ag meetings there normally at 8 o'clock on Wednesday morning. This one is an odd meeting at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So as far as I know from now on, unless you hear different, we'll have them at 8 o'clock on Wednesday morning in this room. So thank y'all for working with us on this particular meeting this morning. So, Representative Corbett, you want to go ahead? Is that it?
That's it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To start with, I'd just like to wish the chairman a happy birthday. For those who don't know, he's got a Valentine's birthday. So day to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday, Mr. Chairman, happy birthday to you. Amen. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring House Bill 876 to you today for your consideration. What brought this bill about when the Rural Development Council went all over this state this past summer, having hearings on from broadband, economic development to forestry. And in Waycross, at the meeting, we was informed that there's actually some locations, some cities here around Atlanta that's actually banning wood products in buildings over 3 stories tall. So this is just a simple one-page bill that prohibits counties and municipalities from banning wood as a construction material so long as such use conforms to all applicable state minimum standard codes and the Georgia Fire Safety Code. Here the word minimum, very misleading. The minimum, just for instance, the minimum GPA to get into the University of Georgia is very high. Same way Georgia Tech, you almost have to have a perfect SAT score to get into Georgia Tech. So it's a very high bar. And the state safety standards is very high as well. And Georgia has adopted the 2012 International Building Code standards, and I would like to go over some of those primary features of that code, Mr. Chairman. And here's, like I said, here's a list, and it applies to all new construction for all multifamily dwellings, Group R2, and it's under the 2012 International Building Code. And like I said, this is not a comprehensive list, but is some of the primary features. One, automatic fire suppression system, fire sprinklers is a must. Smoke detectors, fire alarm systems, standpipe systems for firefighting are required when there are floor levels over 30 feet above the fire department vehicle access. Fire extinguishers in specific locations. Fire resistant building elements, walls, floors, roofs, according to the size, height, Group R. More than 3 stories must have 1 hour fire resistant rated elements. This means that material and construction of the assemblies must be fire tested and have enough gypsum, for instance, to meet a certain fire performance. Fire resistance dwelling unit separations are required. Even in sprinklered buildings, the walls, floors, separating dwellings must be fire resistant rated as well. Special fire resistant rating separations with protected openings are required between residential occupancies and other uses such as mercantile or storage uses. Then there's extensive means for egress. Dominic, that's exiting. But anyway, and the list goes on and on. So the list is fairly extensive. That's a pretty high bar. That's going to get me a question, I'm sure. The national fire data from 2003 to 2007 revealed that residential fire losses topped $6.8 billion with a B. However, less than 1% of those losses occurred in apartment buildings having sprinklers. Fires in sprinkler apartments, regardless of building construction material, are extremely rare compared to other residential fires. Now, you're probably going to hear some testimony today about some sprinkler systems that's inoperable. That brings up a whole different question on what the building's made out of. If it's inoperable, we've got problems. Somebody's not doing their job with routine maintenance and checking on those systems. And you probably hear some conversation about some buildings that pre-existed this code. So a lot of the data comes from buildings that predate this requirement, that don't have the sprinkler system, these other requirements. You know why I believe in local control. I believe consumer control, free market is more important. Our tree farmers are good at what they do. Georgia is the #1 forestry state in the nation. I passed a handout for everybody to see. 22 million acres of private forest land in Florida. I'm sorry, strike that. In Georgia, 28.9 billion in overall annual economic impact to the state. 37 in annual value of ecosystem services. And if you heard Chad Nimmer yesterday in the morning announcement, he said if you have clean air, clean water, and what was that other thing, Mr. Chairman? Was it soft toilet paper? You think a tree farmer. But anyway, here's a list of all the economic impacts and stuff, the values that are forestry adds to the state of Georgia. But by banning lumber, it harms rural Georgia economies. It disrupts the free market. Georgia's home to over 97 sawmills scattered throughout the state, primarily in rural Georgia. Metro Atlanta is a crucial downstream lumber market for Georgia tree farmers. And cutting off market access is a recipe for stunted growth. This bill does not require anyone to have to use lumber. It just levels the playing field, Mr. Chairman. And I don't believe that the government should have its thumb on the scale in business and picking winners and losers. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield for questions, or if we want other people to speak and answer questions later, whatever your pleasure to committee.
Looks like you got a couple of questions. You don't mind from the committee.
Absolutely.
We'll get that, and then we'll do the rest of it. We will forgive you on the Florida slip. You probably have to go to Florida to get to parts of your district.
Actually, I do. I go through Florida to get to the southeast part of my district.
Who's number 9?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If this bill passes, well, we're saying that a city or municipality couldn't put in an RFP no lumber, but in their selection process, if they so chose to bid that use steel construction, they could do that. We're not limiting them in any way or taking that control away. They just couldn't put it out there in RFP.
That is correct. It doesn't require them to use it. It just, let's keep the playing field level.
Thank you.
Henry, is that you?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, that was my question, but let me go to the second question. In Middle Georgia, I own a large metal structure farm, and it's next door to the forestry farm. So is that going to put me out of business, growing the metal structure that I grow?
I don't believe so, but I can check with Ledge
Could
Council
Dominic
and get
give
back
that
with
answer?
you.
No, thank you. I like
Yeah.
the bill. I just had talked to the chairman about that, but no, I do like it.
Thank you for the question.
Dominic, are you one?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll get you later on that, but that was funny. That was a good one. One of the things that we hear a lot about at the national level, the state level, and the local level is how some of these regulations can really force an undue financial burden on some industries or individuals. What about the affordability? When you force somebody to ban wood, then that only leaves you other different types of products. What about affordability of wood versus steel?
That's a good question. There's no question that the banning wood framing drives up the cost of whatever you're building. I mean, I've got estimates anywhere from 30% to 50% increase in the cost. So it does put a burden on your builders to try to build affordable housing. So thank you for the question.
Has anybody else got any questions? We did talk about this on the Rural Development Council. Most of the time we were in Waycross.
We did. You and I sit by
that's-
one another.
Yeah, and that's where most of this came from, is a recommendation, which this is one of many coming out of the Rural Development Council, right?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. We forgot to put a sign-up sheet out there with like we normally do. So we will take testimony from anybody for or against it, but I would ask you, when you do, tell us who you are and who you represent.
Mr. Chairman, could I first get Representative Gasaway to speak to the bill?
That'd be fine.
I don't know if he has to go to a committee.
That'd be fine. And if anybody else has to get to something else, we'll move you up. We're not real restrictive like that Judiciary Committee may be sometimes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nobody accuses me of being folksy or funny, so I'll just get right to it. I've got a good bit of experience with this. I haven't heard the pros or cons, but I had a wood structural engineering professor from Poland who used to always talk about how American structures and American codes were so over-designed. He called it wood. He didn't say wood. He said wood. The wood structures are so over-designed in your country. But the bottom line is, and I'm following this, and my friend here just asked me a few technical questions about some of the periodicals he was getting, and I answered them, but there's no reason for this discrimination that I see. Design materials, especially structural design materials, when you're talking about multi-story buildings, they go through trends. Now, poured-in-place concrete was big, and then all of a sudden some of the New York architects came in and started designing buildings in Atlanta, and then you got steel structures. Now at 10th Street and Spring, I just saw a 5 or 6 story wood-framed apartment being built, which is not. It's relatively new from my experience, but I've been in the country for a while. But I was just here to offer him some feedback based on the critics. So I can just tell you from my experience, metal studs, wood studs, poured-in-place concrete, our building codes in this country are well above any of our understandings and certainly adequate to make sure you're safe. The first thing they teach you and the last thing they teach you when you're designing a building is the last thing you ever want is somebody to burn up in your building. So there's nobody in this country that's going to design a building that puts anybody at risk of fire. I mean, that's not going to happen. So, but I'm really here. If there's some critics that have some information I don't have, maybe I can learn something. But thank you.
Anybody have any questions for Dan? All right, thank you. So anybody that wants to come testify, tell us who you are and who you represent, and I apologize for not having it on a sheet.
Mr. Chairman, Thank you. I'm Michael McPherson with the Georgia Municipal Association, and I'm here to speak about our concerns with the bill. We appreciate everything that Representative Corbett does for us and local control. I was there in Waycross when this issue was brought up by the Forestry Association, and there are a handful of cities that have seen it important to put ordinances in place that speak to the size and the height of stick-built or wood-framed structures. And one of those cities is Sandy Springs. And we have Chief Sanders with us today, who's going to put you through this presentation that they have, how they came to the conclusion that they needed the ordinance, and he's going to speak to that. But one of the things that I wanted to point to is the balance that the cities have to try to get to when it comes to growth and when it comes to public safety. And as you well know, the folks in the rural sector, we just had to study the impact that a lot of our growth is having that you're not seeing in the rural sector, but in the metro area you are. And when that growth turns into a bunch of density, those public safety factors come into play. And I think this ordinance in particular comes out of that need to ensure that everybody is safe, and we'll hear from them about that. But I just wanted to point that out, that the growth, these places where people are moving into in massive numbers because they have a high quality of life, is because they have considered public safety measures such as this. And so with that, I'd ask Chief Sanders to come up if you don't have any questions of me.
Got one question for you.
Yes, sir.
Scott, could you get somebody hand Scott a mic or something?
Number 9 there, Mr. Chairman. Okay, thank you. First question is, how many cities currently have ordinances restricting the use of wood in construction?
So the count that I have is 3, but there may be 1 or 2 that I don't know about.
What are the 3 that you know
So Sandy
of?
Springs is with us today. I believe Tucker and possibly Chamblee. I don't know if, yeah. I believe those are the 3 that, Dunwoody? Okay, maybe Dunwoody other than Chamblee, yeah.
Okay. And are those recent,
I believe so.
within the last couple of years, or?
Probably due to the massive amount of growth we've seen in all those communities.
Okay, thank you.
All right, anybody else? I have heard rumors and conversation that banning the use of wood is a population control for.
I don't think I don't think that the chief will speak to that. I think their concerns are purely in the problems that the communities have had when structures that are very large start to burn. And I think that's what you're going to see in this presentation, and the challenges that the firemen have in putting out those blazes. So if you would, I think he can probably address that.
You did make one statement that I disagree with when you talked about the quality of life.
Yes, sir.
I don't know that living on top of somebody is necessarily what I would call quality of life, but if that's what some folks want to do, then that's great. I'm glad they all living here, not where we are.
We are fortunate to be able to pick where we live.
That's right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. And I've got hard copies of the presentation, so I hope I printed out enough. We'll get you some more if I didn't bring enough.
Okay. Chief, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. First of all, I want to say, Mr. Chairman and committee members, thank you for serving our great state of Georgia and for the job you do. My name is Keith Sanders. I am the fire chief for the city of Sandy Springs. I've been in the fire service for 39 years. And during that time, I have worked with Cobb County Fire Department, city of Alpharetta, and for a very short period of time, I was actually a police officer on the dark side. But my life has been in the fire service, and today we're not here to speak in opposition of wood. Wood is a great product. I used to build houses myself. I'm here today to speak about the safety of our community and residents that are at risk, and during these fire events, these conflagrations, because that's what they have become, especially during the time that the structure is being built. And I know that we have we provided you guys folks with a digital copy of the presentation. Do you have that? Where it can be brought up, or you just got the hard copy? Okay. But so I'll share with you. Yes, and
Chief, I will tell you this, I don't know if this thing's working.
okay, okay.
I know we had a game fish meeting in here, and the whole committee meeting, they tried to make it work, and it wouldn't.
Right.
So,
Okay, we
that's
have,
why- that's why I
in
told
Sandy
Michael.
Springs, we average about about between 50 and 60 structure fires a year. I have a staff of 100 firefighters that are actually in 4 stations in the city of Sandy Springs. The majority of those structure fires are multifamily dwellings. And we do have structure fires in ones that have sprinkler systems and ones that do not. One of the biggest threats to a wooden structure, especially in the state of Georgia, the metro area, and in my experience over my 39 years, is lightning storms. And when the lightning hits the top of that apartment building, the sprinkler is below that, and it burns the entire roof off of that structure. That happens, often throughout our nation, especially here in the metro Atlanta area. Yes, I support wood. I think that here in Sandy Springs, we say that you can still use wood products in multifamily structures as long as they are not greater than 3 stories or 100,000 square feet. If they're beyond that, then we have passed an ordinance that that structure then becomes concrete and steel. There is a great advantages for using wood. Relatively low cost, construction speed, the design, the versatility of it. It's utilized to construct up to 5 stories on top of a concrete podium. Now, think about that in height. So a lot of these structures we're seeing that are designed today in real dense communities, you will have a concrete structure with retail underneath, and then a 4 to 5 story apartment structure above that's made out of wood. So I want you to think about a fire truck, the personnel, and how we make access into that building when it is on fire. And we're talking about buildings that are well over 150 to 200 foot in depth and width. And our fire personnel have to enter those buildings to evacuate occupants, to try to rescue trapped occupants. We're having to park our apparatus in the collapse zones of those buildings. And it becomes a great hazard to our individual as well as to the people that are inside. A lot of people think that, yes, it does have a sprinkler system, and yes, it is approved by the International Building Code, and it is a life safety compliant requirement. And that is a great thing. But sprinklers are not designed to completely extinguish the fire. They are designed to put the fire in check until we can get up there and to put the fire out. Oftentimes the fire gets beyond where the sprinklers are in the HVAC chase, the plumbing chases, and gets right up to the roof and burns the entire roof off. Those are the concerns we have. In the dense areas that has been spoken of, we have these structures that, while being built, sometimes takes up to 8 months to finish these structures. The sprinkler systems often are not even installed until the latter phase, and they are not operational. When these buildings begin to burn, the exposures around those buildings are ignited. And we have evidence over the last 5 years where city blocks have been burned, and buildings that are under construction with this size have been totally devastated and burned additional structures around that building that was being constructed at that time. This is the concern we have. Life safety. It is a concern to me. We've had 3 near misses in Sandy Springs. When I say near miss, we got there quick enough to isolate the fire in one of these structures that was under construction. And if we could not have gotten there in time, the sprinkler, they were not even in yet. It was in the framing phase. It had been 6 months to frame some of these structures. They're so large. When that fire begins to burn, people don't understand. Some people don't understand that fire is a science. And we need to understand that for every minute that a fire burns, the science of fire tells us that it expands 7 times its size for every minute that it burns. And once it gets out of control, we are very limited on how we can get our resources there because these massive structures, they're so large, and really hampers our operations. Sometimes we find there's been over a dozen of these type structure fires across our nation in the last few years. Those structure fires, we have one that was in 2015, a 5-alarm fire of a building that was almost near completion. It's in your brochure there. And this building was in New Jersey. The sprinkler system was fully functional, and one of the 2 apartment complex buildings were destroyed in the fire and permanently displaced about 500 residents. A sprinkled building. Yes, it was a Class A, but it was sprinkled. Another example, 2017, a 6-alarm fire, Avalon Community in Maplewood, New Jersey. 235 units, under construction apartment complex. Burned down. The entire complex building was burned. Another example, 2017 to March, Raleigh, North Carolina. Each one of these made national news. 241 units were under construction. The fire spread to 10 other buildings, $55 million in loss. A tower crane collapsed, and 130 firefighters was on that scene. Let me give you a little example of what happens in Sandy Springs. 2 weeks ago, we had a working apartment fire, 2-story apartment. I had to empty all of our stations. I had 32 people working that day. Every one of them had to be deployed on that fire. For 4 hours, I had to request Cobb County to backfill my fire stations to help. City of Atlanta, the city of Roswell, and even the city of Alpharetta sent me help. They had to leave their territory to come in to help. That was on a 2-story building. These are taking upwards to 7 to 8 hours for fire units and fire personnel to clear the scene. We try to, I am not opposed to wood, but I am very concerned with our life safety. This building can be perfectly compliant, and they are compliant with the International Building Code. But while they're under construction, and we do have an IFC requirement where they're supposed to have fire wardens on the scene. Think about all the hundreds of subcontractors there. Fire prevention is as good as the one guy out there that knows he's not supposed to be smoking a cigarette, but yet he does on that construction scene and flips that cigarette into sawdust, and it begins a fire. And it spreads so quickly and they can't get it out. That's what we're trying to prevent in Sandy Springs. I heard someone say it's because they want to control the building. It has nothing to do with that. I saw this as a 39-year veteran of the fire service and said, I don't want to see hundreds of millions of dollars of structures affected by a good building that catches on fire and expands to exposure buildings and wipes out a city block. We're very dense in Sandy Springs, and we have a lot of, and that's what's so popular, why these buildings are popular. You can take a smaller piece of property, and you can go up higher. And we're saying you can still do that, but if it's exceeding 3 stories, we need to consider the concrete and the steel. So I'm available to answer any questions that you may have concerning the presentation. Once again, we're asking that the state law not be changed and continue to allow we as the local government to establish our own codes that we feel like is necessary because of our city's challenges.
You don't mind answering them? Or
I'll give $3 for a glass of water.
I wish we had one.
5 or 10.
Tom, is that 9?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you and all your
Yes.
members for what you do. Certainly, we all understand, you all put it on the line every time you answer a call, and we certainly respect that. And just to let you know, because I was doing my recertification as an OSHA outreach trainer, I had to do a presentation on the ghost ship fire in Oakland, California, December 2016. 36 people lost their lives. And so I know that was a masonry building, and you can still see this, or at the time you could still see the steel structure, the girders, the rafters and everything. But that fire was clearly what's inside of that. And as long as we got people living inside of buildings and they're gonna bring their stuff and their furniture and everything else, you know, it's not, just because you limit some wood on out, inside that sheetrock, it's not really gonna change the risk if somebody starts a fire or a fire gets started somehow. I just don't see how just picking on pointing out the one part of it, as long as you're gonna allow people to bring stuff in there and not live like, you know, Fred and Wilma Flintstone on hard rock furniture. And that's all really. I'm not sure there's a question in there, just
Well, what I would like to be very clear on here, we're talking about during the 6 to 8 month construction phase when there is no sheetrock on it. Yes, sheetrock is a barrier. Yes, it is fire resistant, and that does change the ball game once it is 100% complete. But it's during that process of time of 6 to 8 months is when these fires are occurring, that are very, it makes it very vulnerable at that time. And so that's my concern.
if I can, Mr. Chairman, but it's there. I mean, what research is there on the start of the fires? I mean, wood's not going to be product of spontaneous combustion like a silo could be.
No, sir. Most of the time, it's human error. The construction workers' error. Mm-hmm.
Chief, thank you for coming and presenting to us today.
Yes, sir.
I have a few questions, and that is that you've spoken of this as being a life safety issue.
Yes, sir.
And you spoke of some catastrophic fires that has happened in other areas. In those areas, was there a loss of life in any of those fires?
There was injuries, not loss of life.
No loss of life. Has anything like that ever happened in Sandy Springs?
We have had, to tell you, we've had a few injuries in these multifamily structures. The last one that we had was 2 years ago. A young lady jumped out of her third-story apartment because the fire had blocked her in, and she was paralyzed from the neck down. We had other two young girls. I actually had a video in this presentation here where two young girls jumped from the second floor, and it broke an arm and was cut up real bad because of their injuries.
Were those fires constructed, were those buildings that these catastrophic events happened, were they constructed based on the current Southern building codes?
With the exception of having a sprinkler system in them, yes, sir, they were.
But now currently we have a sprinkler system, so.
Well, we have some in some buildings. These particular buildings we're speaking of here, that while they are under construction, they do not have active operational sprinkler systems.
Okay, I was merely speaking to the ones where the people.
Yeah, the ones that I spoke of, there was injuries. There was
No
those
sprinkler
were
system.
finished apartments, but they did not have sprinkler systems in them.
Okay, do you know how much additional cost would be added to a builder or developer if we went with just strictly steel and not wood?
I know that it's greater cost, but I don't know the per square foot price.
And one final question. You spoke of probably one of the problems that exists there is a result of the density where a developer or a builder comes in and tries to put as many of these structures on a site as possible. Is there any way that the city could control the density of these facilities, since that seems to be a major concern of Sandy Springs?
I'm gonna have to let, someone else speak of that.
Representative Dukes.
Yes.
I believe, yeah, our zoning allows for control, and this is an aspect of that control that we're talking about right now, the height of the buildings and what they're constructed of. So yes, I believe you're correct. But in these areas where we're seeing the influx of all these people due to all the new businesses that y'all have helped create, they have to incentivize density in some way. And so this is, I think Sandy Springs and Dunwoody and some of the other folks have tried to come up with a middle ground. This won't, their ordinances do not stop the use of wood, and I guarantee you that the use of wood is fine and dandy in Sandy Springs and any of the other communities that have such ordinances in place. But they're saying that when the building gets so big that there is an issue with safety that needs to be addressed, and that is what they're attempting to do.
I guess what my question is, and my concern is that if I have a 7-acre lot and I am putting in 15 buildings, and it's very difficult for you to service those because they're so close, even in the construction phase, is there any way that rather than trying to put in 15 buildings, you might put in 9 to control the amount of density that is there, such that you can address the safety issue that exists?
You need to? Yeah, go ahead. Mr. Dan Lee.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm the city attorney in Sandy Springs, and along with Chairman Willard wrote the ordinance that is in place in Sandy Springs. It's a very good question. The regulation of what it goes on the property is should be, and that's part of our presentation to you today, controlled by the local government. It is granted to us under Article 9 of the Constitution, land use and zoning applications, as well as applicable building codes. And this is a incident of that, trying to control it. The size, the structure, material is all part of the power granted to the city under the Constitution. We could limit that. In fact, we do limit that as part of this safety concern.
Can y'all do me a favor?
Yes, sir.
We
Senator,
losing
thank
members and got 2 or 3 more questions. Are you okay, Winfrey?
Oh, yes, Senator, I appreciate that. I understand. You shed a lot of clarity on it.
There's a half a dozen more meetings going on at 2 o'clock. Buddy, you number 3?
No.
Who's 3? Oh, Darlene, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have great appreciation for first responders. I've got lots of them in my family. But I have concerns, and very much what Representative Dukes brought up. I think this is a zoning issue. This is a building and zoning. I don't think it's a wood issue. This is something I think it's overgrown. All the examples here were units were over 200 to 500 residents in it. I think it's just too big of an area. Too many people you're trying to put in one place, too large to do it. And I don't think it's going to make that much difference with it being wood or whether it's going to be out of metal studs. It's surprising to me that it's come out this way because it is a capacity, putting too many people in one place. And I think by controlling the size of the projects that you allow in your area will make a biggest difference and help you with that. It's not what they're going to be built out of. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, ma'am. Dominic?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess kind of a comment and then a follow-up question. If fire is and public safety is the concern, I can't imagine it's much easier for a fireman to get into a 3-story wood building burning like you know what than it is a 15-story building burning hard, because you still got to go in low or get the ladders up high. So that's just kind of a general comment. But I think the International Building Code is 5 stories as far as wood structures and kind of their perspective at looking at public safety. I would be curious to know, here's the question part. I'd be curious to know what Sandy Springs has done to implement ordinances on general contractors to make sure that they are not building a fire to stay warm on the floor of a construction, during the construction of the building. So can you give us an example of some ordinances that you have implemented to try to keep these structures that are under construction from catching on fire?
Yes, sir. I would ask, Mr. Chairman, I have my fire marshal here, Doug Brown. He's been in the fire service. He can come up and speak with that and answer that question for. He's been in the fire service almost 100 years.
Divided by 2. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, it's a pleasure to be here today. If you'd like me just to answer the question, and you've all had some good points here. One of the problems we have in Sandy Springs is, in fact, density, because we're part of the big metropolitan area. And we've got land that's selling for about $1 million an acre. So as much as we'd like to spread stuff out, it's not happening. We're going up. Everything's going upward. The window of time that we have of difficulty with these buildings is during the framed up stage. I currently have an apartment complex on Peachtree Dunwoody Road that's got 4 stories of framed up lumber on it right now that's 10 feet away from a concrete parking deck that's filled with hundreds of cars. And it's a big concern to us because during this time period, if that building, the wood part, catches fire, we're going to lose the parking deck with all those cars. Those cars are the people in office buildings that are surrounded by the wood framed apartments that are being built around them right now. And it's just, we don't try to put people out of business that are building. We try to work with them to make it a doable situation for us all the way around. But there's a certain window of time that we're just sitting inches away from a calamity, because if the fire started in that apartment building right now and it spreads to the parking deck, those people in those office buildings, and this is only during the week, in the evenings, weekends, we get a pass on it. But during the weekdays, what are those people in the buildings going to do? Their ride home is out in that deck, and they're going to be going out to that parking deck trying to get their cars out of there. And they're going to all jam up. How many people have been caught in traffic jamming a parking deck? Especially if they're in a panic trying to get out of there because there's a big fire. We just had a fire on New Year's Day in England that burned up 1,400 cars in a parking deck, a concrete and steel parking deck. It burned up 1,400 cars. Fortunately, nobody was hurt or killed. But again, we're very limited. The chief told you how many stations we have, how many people we have. If you look at the fire examples that you have there, the type of construction is no different than what we have in over a half dozen places in Sandy Springs right now, as far as all the framed up wood that's there. And we have like 30 people on duty. You look at the numbers of firefighters it takes to fight those fires, it's in the hundreds. And you know traffic, what it is in this area. So you say, yeah, we could get help from DeKalb, we could get help from Atlanta, we can get help from Cobb. Try that at 5 o'clock in the evening. It's going to take forever to get that many people there, and we're going to lose the whole building. The other part of that problem is that the construction that's going on, because we're infilling areas in the city, we have existing buildings next to this framed up construction. People live in them. People have businesses in those. And just like it was Raleigh, North Carolina is a great example of that, where the fire started in the middle of the framed up building. Well, granted, there's nobody living in there right now, but it spread to the other buildings around there.
Doug, we'll briefly explain exactly what you do during the construction to ensure that we work towards making it safe, and what do you do with educating the crews?
Sure, Chief.
Do that kind of quick.
All right. We actually have 7 people in the fire marshal's office. We took half of our resources. We're supposed to be inspecting all the existing buildings in town to meet our ISO requirements. We've had to devote half of our resources to going out to construction sites daily to try to look for those little warming fires where people build a fire with this cold weather to thaw out their air guns for their nail guns. People that go out there and smoke. People actually bring microwave ovens in and ovens into the construction site. We find all kinds of things out there. People bare wires, sticking them in, trying to get something to work, a radio or something that they want on a construction site. We have dumpsters overflowing with material right next to the building, right next to a sidewalk where somebody flips a cigarette in there, and we're going to lose the building. And so we're out there. We've got eyes out there every day. We're working with our building department, our code enforcement people. We're putting as many eyes out there as we can to try to prevent this. But it's an overwhelming problem based on the amount of development that we have right now. And it's going to continue because it's going to continue to go upward.
All right, thank you, sir. We got a couple of more questions real quick, please, and then I think it's one or two more folks want to talk. Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, one of the reasons we try to protect local control from time to time here is because different areas have different challenges. In this aspect, I'm trying to wrap my mind around why is it different for Sandy Springs than maybe like a city like Waycross or Rome? What are some of the unique challenges you have in Sandy Springs that wouldn't be experienced in other cities?
I will say this. Yes, I'm probably the only fire chief that I know of in the state that has pushed to and encouraged council to consider this ordinance. My overarching concern is the high risk that we have because of the mass number of these structures that we have continually being built throughout the city, and the density and the exposures that we have around those facilities, and I'm wanting to reduce that threat of one of these to occur, so you know, I really don't know what their thought process is and thinking. I'm trying to be proactive. I was trying to be proactive and preventive in order to reduce the risk, and I, you know, the gentleman mentioned a while ago about, you know, 2-story versus 5-story. There is a huge difference in fighting a 2-story apartment building on a crawl space or on a slab versus fighting a 5-story apartment building, wood frame, on top of a 25 to 30 foot concrete podium. We are extremely limited. Our aerials cannot even get water down onto the building because it is so large. We have to really flow it at an angle to get it to drop into the building, and so it's very difficult, and that's one of the reasons why that I was pushing to have this approved.
What are you using besides wood?
Sir?
When you have a 5-story building, what are you using instead of wood?
Well, right now, they're still, the ones that were under construction were still being, under the wood frame with multifamily. We've got, I don't know that we have any buildings that are being constructed right now out of concrete and steel.
No, we do not, no.
And are there any, if we did use a concrete or steel, are there any examples of those types of buildings burning in similar catastrophic fashion that you've shown in these examples?
I'm sorry, say the question again, please.
If you were to use concrete or steel in the construction of these 5-story buildings, are there examples of catastrophic failures like the examples that you provided to the committee in the presentation?
No, there are not, and the reason is the concrete and steel doesn't burn. Some contents would burn, perhaps. They've had very minor fires, but they're not at a large scale like that. And again, every floor that you add on of more lumber is times that amount of fuel that you have to deal with. That much more heat that's output to the surrounding buildings. That many more embers get up in the air and travel out to the community. And that's our concern. We're going to be overwhelmed. We know it, and we know an old expression is this: if it's predictable, it's preventable. That's where we're trying to go with this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Mr. Buddy, are you for?
This question probably won't require an answer. It comes to my mind, we've got established building and fire safety codes that have been established that apply everywhere. Mm-hmm. And is it right for a city to use a change in those codes in order to control their density? I don't know that, I mean, evidently the fire safety codes seem to think that it works just as well up to a 5-story building as I've heard here. Well, then we need to use something else to control density. We don't need to change fire safety codes to control density. And listen, I appreciate what all y'all do, and I know y'all do put it online every day. I was a mayor one time. Of course, in my city, we didn't have over a 3-story high building, so I know. But I just wonder, is it right, for us to change fire safety codes, make them more stringent? We feel like more stringent to satisfy the council not having to take some other measures into that might control density without that. But and I don't require an answer. That was just kind of a question that comes to my mind. Thank you very
All right, thank you, Chief, thank you very much
Yes,
for
sir.
taking your time to
Thank
come
you.
down here and bringing your people with you. Is there anybody else, one way or the other, want to testify? Andre?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you this morning. My name's Andres, or this afternoon. My name's Andres Villegas, and I represent the Georgia Forestry Association. On behalf of the entire industry, we are supportive of this bill, very supportive of this bill. Of course, forestry in Georgia, we're the #1 forestry state in the nation. About a $35 billion impact to the state's economy, 144,000 jobs, and about 2/3 of the state covered by working forest. All of that's private property. Private property that's trying to generate profit by selling timber that ends up in sawmills, and then lumber that gets converted into lumber, paper, and other products that we use every single day for the homes that we live in and other uses. You know, the Georgia Forestry Association is guided by 3 core principles, and all of these apply to this particular issue. Number one is the issue of private property rights, and letting the market and letting private landowners and private business and women make the decisions that they feel are appropriate for their investments. Number two is healthy markets, and when the hand of government is tipping the scale, that's a problem for a lot of people, and that's one of the issues for us with this bill as well, that this bill attempts to address. And then number two is sensible taxes and regulation. We know we need to have fire safety standards. We know we need to have building codes. We know we need to have zoning. But we know it needs to be sensible. It needs to be balanced. And it needs to be in a way that continues to allow us to grow as an economy and as a state. For that reason, we ask for your support for this particular bill, primarily just to allow for a level playing field so that the market can decide what products it needs to use when it's going out to build buildings. Some of you may know that I used to, I spent most of my career in industry. I used to run a manufacturing facility that ran 24/7, had about 240 employees in it. I've also been involved in harvesting and haul operations on the forestry side. A lot of my colleagues have been involved in fighting fires and fire prevention. The F word, like we like to call it in our industry, is something that we take extremely seriously. The lives that we have in our hands and the employees that work for us in the industry is something that we're very careful about. Obviously, we know what a devastating fire can do at the industrial scale as well as out in the forest. And because of that, this issue is one that also from the safety perspective, we listen to and we appreciate the work that other folks and the concerns that folks have. We know that buildings can be protected. I think in the case of buildings that are under construction that don't have all the safety facilities in them yet, it's a little bit of an unfair example. It'd be almost like taking a car that's under construction that doesn't have airbags and doesn't have seat belts and putting it through the rigors of a safety crash test. We know that there's no way for that in that case for you to have a good performance, if you will. And so from the perspective of what these buildings look like when they're done, we know we have lots of examples of buildings, modern buildings that are built not only in Georgia, not only in metro Atlanta, but all over the world that are very safe and that house millions and billions of people every single day. So from that perspective, we know that these catastrophic fires that have happened, the examples that you've heard of, a lot of people are responding to them. The banks, the financiers that are behind those, the insurance companies that are insuring those large projects, the construction companies that are involved in those, none of those folks want to see these buildings go up in flames. So a lot of changes have happened. To your question, Representative Lurica, the International Code Council recently recommended a change to require fire watches during off hours so that vagrants or other equipment that may have been left active or whatever it may be won't cause those types of things. There's a lot more pressure being placed on the disciplines that are required. But my point is all those things are controllable. All those things can be controlled for through good management, good disciplines, oftentimes with good oversight from our public officials as well as from the folks who are involved on the business side of that. We believe that we want to continue to see forestry in Georgia thrive. We want to continue being the #1 forestry state in the nation. And for that, we need to have sensible taxes and regulations, healthy markets, and private property rights. And for that reason, we ask for your support on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Andres. You did good. There's no questions. Hayden?
Mr. Chairman, just very briefly, my name is Hayden Stanley on behalf of the Georgia Apartment Association, and it may surprise many of you to learn that we did not bring this bill to Representative Corbett. Thank you for your sponsorship and the other co-sponsors. I want to talk just very quickly because I know that there's another committee getting ready to start, and you've been here and heard a good bit of testimony. But in some of the local communities that have adopted this standard, there is a very real impact on affordability. I think Representative Corbett referenced between 30 and 50% cost increase. One specific apartment property that was planned in the city of Tucker, they found that the cost increase of this type of ordinance increased it by 48%. And the only way that you can make steel or concrete construction make any financial sense is to go up in height, its density. So on steel, it's between 6 and 8 stories. And on concrete, it's 8 stories or higher. And in the case of the city of Tucker, at least at the time that this project was under consideration, they didn't allow for that. So it does greatly impact the affordability of construction. Ironically, a couple of the same communities that have adopted these have also impaneled housing affordability commissions to look at why housing is so expensive. Please pass this bill. If you have specific questions on any of the process that goes into Georgia's model code adoption process, which is very inclusive, I'd be happy to chase that down. If you have questions about fire safety and apartment construction, I'd be happy to chase that down and provide it to you as well.
Dominic, real quick.
Just quick, I know that some of these apartment complexes, because of density and the area they're located, they like green certification. On a steel structure, you're disqualified from green certification. And ironically, those two communities usually want green certification and higher regulation, and those two don't go together.
Clay.
Mr. Chairman, at the appropriate time, I'd like to make a motion to pass.
Sounds good enough, I guess. We got a motion and a second do pass on 876. Is there any questions or discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That you, Matt? Okay. It seems like it passed. Thank you to everybody that came today and testified, and I appreciate your time.
I gotta tell you, at $1 million in